Good afternoon. So we just wrapped up lesson 4, and I want to give a quick rundown for those of you that were not in class, kind of what we covered, and then for those that will not be in class on Monday, just an expectation of what we'll be doing for lesson 5. So briefly, over my left shoulder, you'll see that during lesson 4, we talked about the methods of influence, is kind of the way the textbook describes it, and it's really captured best by that simple quad chart over my shoulder there, where we are trying to coerce an adversary to do something or cooperate with them and make them do something. Usually that's a form of a stick and a carrot is the way I articulate that. And of course we can do that a number of ways if we want to change the situation or we want the situation to remain the same. So the status quo would be an example of preventing the situation from changing. And maybe we want to change the status quo and we can cause an action to take place. So along that continuum, we talked about deterrence, of course, from using a stick instead of a carrot. From a stick perspective, we want to deter the adversary or compel the adversary to change their behavior. Inversely, usually done with friendly nations, more often than not, allies or others, but sometimes with adversaries, we can choose to do a cooperative approach. And those would be providing assurance or persuasion if we want the situation to change. So read through the textbook. That should be a pretty good summary of how these things work together. And then the second part of class today, we really unpacked the compellents. So when we need to provide a stick, if you will, to change the behavior of the adversary, there's a continuum of conflict, usually going from a left to right over there, or left to right, with the extreme measure being extermination, and on the far end being, the other end being subversion. We talked about each of those. Extermination, annihilation, exhaustion, denial, intimidation, finally subversion. So there's subtle nuances with all of those things. Those are captured on page 98 of your textbook in figure 4.1. So be sure you can recognize and put those things in order and understand the nuances between each of those things. Another objective for the lesson 4 is to make sure you can identify the target sets that are most suitable for using depending upon the strategy you're adopting. For example, if you are using a strategy of denial, meaning you want to keep the adversary from getting to the fight in the first place, your target sets are going to look different than they would if you were exercising an annihilation strategy. So be able to answer the question, what kind of targets would we be electing to wage war against in that situation versus the annihilation strategy? And the answer is, bridges, rear echelon type lines of communication, maybe blocking sea lanes of communication is what they call it, or transport lanes, those kind of things. So as you read the text, just make sure you can kind of recreate that quad chart right up here on a blank sheet of paper and understand it. And then likewise, be able to describe that curricula or the continuum of compellence options there, methods or ways of compellence. Okay, moving forward for lesson 5, we're now shifting gears. We've identified that we've identified a lot of things in class thus far leading us to this point. Now we're going to be talking about specifically when we need to use the military, how are they organized. We're going to start with the combatant commands versus kind of an organizational chain of command versus an administrative chain of command. We'll talk about that in class, so make sure you hone in on that. We'll also be talking about the joint force structure, how they're organized to fight different levels of staffs they have, the J1, J2, J3, J4, etc. So when you see that in the reading, make sure you dial that in and pay attention to that. So I'm looking at the objectives out of the syllabus. This is kind of how we shape kind of what we're talking about. So lesson 4 or lesson 5 objectives. Identify operational and administrative chain of command. Distinguish between geographic and functional combatant commanders. We will unpack that as well. And for those that were in class today, keep in mind, like we shared, we will be selecting a combatant command that you'll be focusing on for the rest of the semester. So as you read, kind of think which ones might be of interest to you and your group. We also need to know what the roles are in the Joint Task Force. That would be like the Air Component Commander or the JFAC, the JIFMIC, the Joint Forces Maritime Component Commanders. We're talking about how the services are organized in a joint structure. And then finally, we're going to talk about Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 and kind of what brought us to the joint force as it is today. So that's kind of a teaser, what's happening on lesson 5. We'll look forward to seeing you in class. In the meantime, be safe this weekend. Enjoy the fun you have planned. And please chat me on Teams if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.